What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back today with the unique privilege of celebrating the 75th anniversary of Strangers on a Train, directed by the master of suspense, Sir Alfred Hitchcock. Based on the novel by Patricia Highsmith, this movie occupies a special place in my heart as the first Hitchcock movie that I watched voluntarily with my friends just for entertainment purposes, as opposed to getting assigned one of his classics for a class. And we were just enthralled, but I bet it was more accessible to us because it had already been featured in the comedy Throw Mama from a Train, but obviously it helps that Strangers on a Train is a wildly enjoyable movie with a killer premise, a brilliant villain, and plenty of style to spare.
Want to hear one of my ideas for a perfect murder? You want to hear the busted light socket in the bathroom or the carbon monoxide in the garage?
Neither one. I may be old-fashioned, but I thought murder was against the law.
And while I did not know this at the time, Strangers on a Train marks the beginning of a really strong period for Alfred Hitchcock. And while he made excellent movies across 6 different decades, from the 1920s to the 30s to the 40s to the 50s to the 60s and even into the 70s, a case could be made that the 50s is his strongest period, which gave us Rear Window, Vertigo, North by Northwest, and many more. But in preparation for this video, I recently picked up the Blu-ray for this movie, and if you can find it in your heart to ignore the loathsome cover that was designed by the world's least talented intern, it's got some really great special features, like an alternative ending, which I'd never seen before. There's also a really good behind-the-scenes documentary, as well as a commentary track that's pieced together with some audio excerpts by Hitchcock himself, as well as his many admirers like filmmaker Peter Bogdanovich, as well as film historian Richard Schickel. And quick side note, when I bought the Blu-ray, I shared my frustration with the cover art over on X and posted some of the gorgeous posters that would have made much better alternatives, like this classic where Hitchcock is adding an L to the title. But some moron had the goddamn gall to tell me I should print out my own cover art and slide it in. Let's make one thing sparkling clear: I am the customer, not the employee, and if I go to a restaurant that serves me a terrible meal, I don't barge into the kitchen to show them how it's done properly. And the reason I was so frustrated is that this is part of a much larger problem where we see a lot of classic movies released on Blu-ray with horrible cover art, almost like people seem to be like single-mindedly trying to undermine and destroy classic movies with terrible marketing. My attitude is just use the classic posters that were created at the time of the movie's release and you can't go wrong. But let's get back to celebrating Alfred Hitchcock, aka Hitch. A couple of years ago, I created a video where I ranked my top 10 favorite movies at that time, and in preparation for that video, I watched every remaining movie in his filmography that I'd not seen before. And there's still a few episodes of TV out there that he directed that I've not seen, but I'm kind of saving those for a rainy day because in my mind, I never want my journey to discovering the work of Alfred Hitchcock to be to be complete. But the reality is my list of favorite Hitchcock movies is constantly changing depending upon my mood or which movies I've seen recently or which movies I'm looking forward to seeing again. So at the end of this video, I'll include an updated top 10 list, and Strangers on a Train is definitely in the mix.
So, they swap murders.
Swap murders?
Each fellow does the other fellow's murder. Then there's nothing to connect them. Each one has murdered a total stranger. Like, you do my murder, I do yours.
But in 2026, it's a relief to see just how much people still love the movies of Alfred Hitchcock. People are still buying his movies, watching his movies, being assigned his movies in classes. I have a sister who's 26 years my junior. When she was an undergrad, I used to help her on some of her film papers. Don't tell her her teachers. But oftentimes, we were talking about Vertigo and some of his best movies. But we're at a point now where he's so respected and so beloved and so celebrated, it's tough to imagine a time where he was dismissed as a light entertainer. And first of all, there's nothing wrong with being a light entertainer. There are plenty of so-called respectable directors out there who are incapable of joy or entertainment, whereas Hitchcock, with his cameos and his promotional skills, became the most recognizable director of his era. But if you watch the incredible documentary Hitchcock Truffaut from 2015, the movie does an incredible job of showing how this collaboration between Alfred Hitchcock and Francois Truffaut changed the way the film enthusiasts look at his movies forever.
You're running now, huh?
And this is my second copy of the book because I read my first copy of the book so many times that the pages started to fall out. But what I love about the book is that it's about the craft. I feel like too many filmmakers get tripped up trying to interpret their films, and I feel like that's the job of historians, that's the job of critics, that's the job of movie enthusiasts. But the book does a brilliant job of focusing on and breaking down the craft and the technique of Hitchcock's entire career up to that time. And the audio recordings were made at a time where Hitchcock was really firing on all cylinders. He was making movies like Psycho and The Birds and Marnie. But if you'll indulge me, I'm going to read one passage from the book, and I hope you'll forgive me for not trying to imitate Alfred Hitchcock's signature speaking style. I've tried to do that accent before. It's not possible. But here's the passage that I like. Alfred Hitchcock says, "It's been my good fortune to have something of a monopoly on the genre. Nobody else seems to take much interest in the rules for that form." Francois Truffaut asks, "What rules?" Hitchcock says, "I'm talking about the rules of suspense. That's why I've more or less had the field to myself. Selznick claimed I was the only director whom he could trust completely, but when I worked for him, he complained about what he called my goddamn jigsaw cutting. I used to shoot the one piece of film in such a way that no one else could put the pieces together properly. The only way they could be edited was to follow exactly what I had in mind in the shooting stages." Selznick comes from the school of filmmakers who like to have lots of footage to play around with in the cutting room. Working as I do, you're sure that no one in the studio is going to take over and ruin your film. And the conversation goes on from there to describe how Hitchcock put together one of my favorite sequences in this movie, where we're introduced to the two main characters through the shots of their feet. And we see them going one way, we see them going another way, and eventually the 2 feet collide, and boom, that's when we finally see the characters' faces. But right from the word go when you're watching this movie, you know you're in the hands of a master storyteller, a master visual stylist, where he knows precisely the images he wants to put on the screen, how he wants to shoot them, what emotions you want to feel as you're watching them. And it's one of those things that you can totally understand on kind of a gut primitive level as you're watching the movie for the first time, but once you read two master practitioners of their craft kind of breaking down these scenes, it's just a vivid reminder that these incredible sequences, they do not happen by accident, they happen by design. So once again, the book Hitchcock Truffaut is a one-of-a-kind resource for understanding why a good Hitchcock movie looks, sounds, and feels unlike any other films ever made by any other director. He's one of the best directors ever when it comes to controlling and directing our attention to a specific prop or a detail that's vital to whatever deranged or demented story he might be telling. And while there are plenty of great directors out there who have a much more naturalistic approach, and there are other directors out there who shoot a lot of coverage from a lot of angles, so they have a lot of options in the editing room, but with Hitchcock, he had complete and total control and mastery over every frame of film in his movies, and there's not a moment that's left to chance or accident. His photographic style is unlike any other that has come before or since, but because a lot of his films are so glamorous and so stunningly beautiful, they're basically the movie equivalent of sharing a glass of champagne with the world's sexiest woman. I think we too often overlook just how perverted and disturbing his movies truly are, especially a movie like Strangers on a Train. This is a world where it seems like it's totally normal, where everyday, healthy, normal characters can have their lives repeatedly turned upside down by a variety of really wealthy eccentrics who seem to spend every waking moment fantasizing about murder.
Oh, that reminds me of a wonderful idea I had once. I used to put myself to sleep at night, figuring it out.
Analyzing and discussing murder.
Still think it'd be wonderful to have a man love you so much he'd kill for you.
Or just indulging in outright murder.
Well, I suppose I'll have to get a gun from somewhere.
Oh, no, Mrs. Cunningham. Bang, bang, bang all over the place. Blood everywhere.
How about a little poison?
Which is why his sensibilities are a perfect fit for this story, because Patricia Highsmith had a very similar attitude where she believed just about anybody on any given day could be a pervert, a sadist, or a murderer. And now's the moment where I confess, I have not read a single book by Patricia Highsmith, but sooner or later, we're going to have to crack open the plot of this movie, which is apparently quite a departure from the book, although Patricia Highsmith acknowledged while she was annoyed by the changes to the story, she did really love the character of Bruno, as performed by Robert Walker, and of course she did. He's one of the greatest villains in the history of movies.
Pick 'em up. Bang, bang.
But at some point, I'm going to need to start cracking open some books by Highsmith, because people have been adapting her books into good movies for decades. I'm talking about movies like Purple Noon or The Town of Mr. Ripley or Carol. I mean, she's got this giant body of work that people just keep coming back to. But as much as I might be reluctant to say anything mean or nasty about Alfred Hitchcock, I have to admit he kind of got access to her book in an underhanded fashion, because he acquired the rights to the novel through a third party. She didn't know it was Alfred Hitchcock coming after the material. Otherwise, she would have gotten considerably more money. So he got the rights for $7,500. And some might argue, well, because Hitchcock adapted this book into a movie and it was a hit, that opened the door to a lot more movie adaptations of her books. In any case, once Alfred Hitchcock got his hands on the book, he went in search of a screenwriter who could bring a little extra kind of glitz and glamour and prestige to the project. And he wanted to find a writer who really excelled with mystery and suspense and thrillers. And he landed on Raymond Chandler, who really excelled as a novelist, but could be tough to work with. as a screenwriter, he was one of those writers who liked to go up into like kind of an isolated place and drink for weeks and then come out at the end with a completed manuscript. But Alfred Hitchcock had some really specific ideas about what he wanted to do visually with the story. So inevitably, they just started having friction and conflict. And I want to read one more passage from this book where Hitchcock describes some of their initial friction. Probably should have marked the page in advance as opposed to looking around like a big dummy on camera, but hang on. I'm getting close. Where the hell is it? Here it is. All right, he says, whenever I collaborate with a writer who, like myself, specializes in mystery, thriller, or suspense, things don't seem to work out too well. Truffaut asks, you're referring to Raymond Chandler? Hitchcock says, right. Our association didn't work out at all. We'd sit together and I would say, why not do it this way? And he'd answer, well, if you can puzzle it out, what do you need me for? The work he did was no good, and I ended up with Chinzi Ormond, a woman writer who was one of Ben Hecht's assistants. And for people out there who don't know who Ben Hecht is arguably maybe the best screenwriter who ever lived. I mean, there are a lot of strong contenders on that front, but Ben Hecht from like the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and 60s, like if you just look up his list on IMDb, you're like, oh my God. Like, Ben Hecht was everywhere, and he worked with Howard Hawks over and over again. So anybody who was part of his staff, well, you're probably in very good hands. Now, in order to discuss the overall story and how it differs from the book, I will have to go into some specifics from the plot. So if you've not seen the movie, first and foremost, thank you for sticking with me this long. But I recommend you go watch the movie right now and watch it again and watch it for a third time. Then come back to this video where I'll sing the praises of all the best highlights from the movie. But the official story as written over on IMDb is a psychopath tries to forcibly persuade a tennis star to agree to his theory that two strangers can get away with murder by submitting to his plan to kill the other's most hated person. Or as they say in the movie, crisscross. I mean, I love that bit. Crisscross.
For example, your wife, my father. Crisscross. What? Oh, we do talk the same language, don't we?
It's such a great setup, but in the original novel, my understanding is that the character played by Farley Granger, he's not a tennis player, he's an architect, and one of the big plot differences, at one point when Bruno is basically saying, like, how come you haven't killed my father yet? Like, I killed your ex-wife, like, you need to kill my father. In the novel, apparently the character of Guy actually does follow through with killing the father, as opposed to showing up and trying to warn the father, whereupon we get the surprise that Bruno's hiding in his father's bed, and he's shocked and horrified that his new best friend, hasn't carried through on his diabolical scheme. But beyond that, you'll have to ask somebody who's actually read the book. But I know those were two of the major departures from the text. But when it comes to thrillers and suspense films that have a good dramatic hook for luring in the audience's attention, it's tough to think of a better hook than Strangers on a Train. Two total strangers bump into each other on a train. They have a couple drinks, they get to talking about their lives, one of whom is a massive tennis fan, and he's well aware of the fact that Guy's a problem, where he's got an ex-wife who won't give him a divorce. Meanwhile, Guy's trying to marry the daughter of a very powerful politician who's offered him a career in politics, so it's absolutely vital that he gets this divorce. Meanwhile, Bruno, he's a little bit of an unhinged character. He likes to drink. He doesn't do much of anything, as he says repeatedly in the movie, but he has a great admiration for people who do things. But his father hates him. I mean, the way he says, he hates me.
All right, so I'm a bum.
Who said you were?
My father. He hates me.
His delivery style, everything about Robert Walker's performance in this movie just makes you like scream and crack up and laugh with glee. Just something about his delivery style and the way he just imbues the character. Like, he's such a naughty boy, but sometimes he goes too far, as his mother likes to describe him.
I'm sure that this whole thing is just some practical joke. Bruno, he sometimes goes a little too far.
But he's a strong contender for Hitchcock's best villain. And of course, you can mention movies like Notorious or Psycho and some of these other movies that give us amazing villains. But Robert Walker as Bruno, I mean, the only thing that kind of makes it a little bit bittersweet is that this would be one of his final acting roles. He died at a very, very young age. And here are the details of his unfortunate demise, as written over on Wikipedia. On the night of August 28, 1951, Walker's housekeeper found him in an emotional state. She called Walker's psychiatrist, Frederick Hacker, who arrived and administered amobarbital for sedation. Walker had allegedly been drinking before the outburst, and the combination of amobarbital and alcohol is believed to have caused him to lose consciousness and stop breathing. Efforts to resuscitate him failed, and he was pronounced dead shortly thereafter at the age of 32. But for me, what makes this movie irresistible and so endlessly rewatchable is the relationship between these two characters, because everybody can relate to somebody who's in a situation where somebody wants to be their friend and they don't want to be their friend in return. So that's instantly relatable. None of us can really relate to the idea of a madman coming into our lives and turning everything upside down. But you can definitely relate to a situation where somebody just has zero, like, he doesn't understand social cues, and he doesn't understand when he's crossing the line, and he just keeps intruding upon Guy's life over and over and over again. It's as hilarious as it is maddening, as it is disturbing. And a lot of people have decided to read into it that there's a bit of a gay subtext to their relationship. Hitchcock is asked about that by Truffaut in the interview, and Hitchcock basically says it's there if you want to read it that way, but it's never stated explicitly because this was 1951 and he wasn't about to do an overt gay stalker story. But it's absolutely underneath the surface if you want to go digging for it, as it was also the case in the movie Rope, yet another movie starring Farley Granger. And quick side note, I think Farley Granger's performance in Rope is far superior to his performance in Strangers on a Train. However, he's totally fine. It's just that Robert Walker steals each and every single scene in which he appears. But in the end, as great as their performances are, as great as the screenplay is, what makes this movie fascinating is Hitchcock's handling of the material. His style, his pacing, the way he employs music, the way he directs our attention. It's just like it's like a master conductor conducting the orchestra, and everybody playing their instruments is at the absolute top of their game. And it's just an absolute fucking thrill ride from start to finish, with like 10 Hall of Fame sequences scattered throughout the movie. And speaking of the man himself, he made many great cameos in his movies over the years. Maybe my favorite is when he pops up in our Rear Window, but this is a really, really good one. But in addition to his cameos, what I love are the trailers for his movies, where he is part of like the tease for the film. I mean, his introduction for Psycho, it's probably the best trailer for a movie ever like performed by a director in all of movie history. It's like, oh, like up there, I can't talk about it. It's just too horrible.
The victim tumbled and fell with a horrible crash. I think the back broke immediately and hit the floor. It's difficult to describe the way that the twisting of the. Well, I won't dwell upon it. Come upstairs.
Or his trailer that he did for Frenzy when he's floating down the Thames River in London.
I dare say you are wondering why I am floating around London like this. I am on the famous Thames River, investigating a murder.
He was just such a consummate showman. Or the way his profile would kind of step into view on the show Alfred Hitchcock Presents. He was just, he was such a natural ham, such a natural character in so many ways. But I love his cameos. And there's so much about this movie that feels intensely personal. Like it's a weird, warped, twisted mirror being held up to Hitchcock so we can study some of his own interests and preoccupations. Like the scene where Bruno is hanging out with those old ladies at the cocktail party deep into the movie. Probably my favorite scene in the movie because I feel like it's the perfect Hitchcock scene where you have very wealthy elite people having their cocktails and they got their jewelry and they're all dolled up, and it's like, it's politicians and athletes and celebrities, and it's like, the beautiful people. They've all gathered for this party. And in the middle of this party is Bruno talking to two little old ladies, and what are they talking about? Murder.
Then have to walk all the way home? Oh, no. I have the best way and the best tools.
And not only is he telling them about his ideas on murder, they're sharing their ideas on murder, and they're discussing techniques. And it's a common thing you see in a lot of Hitchcock movies. You have great scenes like that in Shadow of a Doubt as well, which is another personal favorite. But I just love how, like, in the world of all these powerful people, that you had these, kind of maniacs. Some of whom are casual enthusiasts on the subject of murder. Some of whom are actually well-versed on the subject of murder. And of course, it immediately goes to the dark side because apparently Hitchcock in real life used to enjoy demonstrating how to strangle somebody in real life and how to cut off the air so they can't scream. And of course, Bruno gives one of those demonstrations here. However, what the little old lady does not know is that Bruno is going to see Alfred Hitchcock's daughter, Patricia Hitchcock. He's going to see those glasses that are going to remind him of the girl that he already murdered in the park. And he'd seen her earlier in the movie and he kind of locked up. But now he really locks up, and it's just everything you need to know about Hitchcock's style and technique and preoccupations. It's all contained in this one scene. One of the most obvious preoccupations of Hitchcock with this movie, he loved trains. I don't know if any filmmaker ever spent more time shooting great scenes on trains or making the plots of his movies revolve around trains. I mean, it's in the title, Strangers on a Train. But like The Lady Vanishes, that's a great movie with great scenes on a train. Almost the entire movie takes place in a train. North by Northwest has probably the greatest seduction scene on a train that we will ever see. But for whatever reason, Hitchcock loved trains, loved putting them in movies, loved riding trains. And so it's just one of those things where whether he was doing it self-consciously or not, or he just couldn't help himself, his movies always end up becoming a perfect visual representation of all of his interests, whether it's exotic platinum blondes or trains or strangling people at parties or whatever the case might be. And for a guy who was kind of like, dismissed at the time as like a light entertainer, now it's so obvious that he's making deeply personal movies in a very highly stylized way. But it's incredible how people could not see his movies for what they were at the time of their release. And luckily, Francois Truffaut helped everybody see the greatness that was contained within them. And throughout his career, Hitchcock always made a very clear distinction between suspense versus surprise, or suspense versus shock. And this movie has different examples of both, but suspense is basically when the audience has knowledge that the characters do not. And we're like, oh no, what's going to happen when they discover, the bomb under their chair, or that certain prop is going to give away everything. And so we have suspense, which we're waiting in anticipation. And Hitchcock is a master of saying, look at this little name on Bruno's tie. That's going to be relevant later on. And when it comes up, we're like, oh my God, now I get it. But he keeps us like on the edge of our seats in suspense. But there's also surprise or shock, like when Guy is like tiptoeing through this mansion.
Don't be alarmed, but I must talk to you about your son. About Bruno, Mr. Anthony.
Yes, Mr. Haynes?
And he's about to tell Bruno's father, like, your son's crazy and he's plotting your murder. The lights come on and boom, it's Bruno. It doesn't like give you a jump scare. I mean, that would come later with Psycho. That was like the greatest jump scare of all time. But we definitely feel surprise. But when it comes to his own forms of dread and the things that Alfred Hitchcock was afraid of, he was very free and open over the years about the things that really upset him. Like, he was terrified of police officers because his father, as like a joke, or like maybe to teach him a lesson when he was a little kid, sent him down to the police station where a friend of Hitchcock's father locked Hitch in a cell for like 10 minutes. And apparently it just traumatized him and he never recovered. But you can see it in movies like Psycho, how terrified he was of police officers. But what surprised even Hitchcock himself while making this movie, there's one moment which absolutely terrified him, which he did not anticipate in advance. But at the end of the movie, when the carousel's running amok and spinning like, basically at the speed of light and everybody's clinging to it for dear life, there's a little old man who volunteers to go underneath and turn it off. But they shot the scene for real. For somebody who spent so much time on sound stages and had total control, it's amazing that he would do something that was so dangerous. But he said like his palms sweated for like the rest of his life thinking back on that moment, because if that little old man had raised his head even like a half an inch, he would have been killed then and there. So it was one of the most dangerous things that was ever shot on any of his movies. But there it is in the movie. You see like how close that spinning thing is going by his head. And that little old man's not doing the best job of kind of like staying on his belly. In any case, even the master of suspense was capable of feeling great fear. But there's another aspect to Hitchcock's technique that was very well known throughout his career, and this movie was no exception, but oftentimes he would plan out his movies in advance in such precise detail that by the time they got to the actual shooting, he would get a little bored, because he would storyboard like rigorously and he would plan out all these very specific shots. But at a certain point, he loved planning these shots and he loved designing the visual language of his movies. But on the set, that's where things can go wrong, and like you can get like unhappy accidents. And he didn't necessarily like a lot of accidents. But on this movie, at one point, Farley Granger asked him like what was wrong, because Hitchcock seemed to be upset on the set, and he just said, "Oh, I'm so bored." Here he is making this absolute masterpiece, and yet he's completely bored by the process, because for him the fun was creating the visual language, the grammar of the movie in advance, and the rest was just the busy work. But one of his great partners in crime in creating this visual language was D.P. Robert Burks, and he shot a lot of Hitchcock's best movies, but this was the beginning of a 13-year collaboration between Robert Burks and Hitchcock. So if, like me, you like Hitchcock's movies from the 50s and early 60s, well then you have Robert Burks to thank, because if you're dealing with somebody who is so specific in what they're trying to achieve in terms of the visuals of their movie, well then you're going to need one of the best goddamn directors of photography you can get your hands on, and luckily Robert Burks was more than up to the task. And Burks has this great quote about working with Hitchcock where he said, "You never have any trouble with him as long as you know your job and do it. Hitchcock insists on perfection. He has no patience with mediocrity on the set or at a dinner table. There can be no compromise in his work, his food, or his wines." And as you can tell from Hitchcock's waistline, he obviously had a sentimental weakness for good food and good wine. But as far as Hitchcock's meals are concerned, I wish I could have been there just to be a fly on the wall for just one meal, just to observe the family dynamics. Because Hitchcock and his wife Alma married at a very young age, and she basically worked officially and unofficially on every single movie that he worked on for the rest of his career. And you can see there's some shots early on in his career where she's there on the set. Other times he would just seek her advice or opinion on certain matters. But with Patricia, she has a really great role in this. This is the best role for Patricia Hitchcock in any of his movies. She also has a great little bit in Psycho.
He was flirting with you. I guess he must have noticed my wedding ring.
And the way she delivers that line to Janet Leigh, of all people, about how this person must have noticed her wedding ring. That line always makes me howl. But she's so goddamn good in Strangers on a Train. I'm like, how come you couldn't have used her in like 10 more movies? Because she really seems to understand Hitchcock's sense of humor, where sitting around and having polite conversations about murder and death and intrigue and so on and so forth with a smile on your face just seems like Patricia Hitchcock was born to be in these kinds of movies.
Back to bed, Barbara.
Well, you two, nothing stands in your way now. You can be married right away. Think of it. You're free.
One doesn't always have to say what one thinks.
Father, I am not a politician.
And I got to see her speak publicly one time in the early 2000s where she introduced one of Hitchcock's movies at a revival house in LA. And she was still full of personality and stories and anecdotes. She was just absolutely delightful. But in any case, I wish they'd have found an opportunity to work together more frequently. But at least we have Strangers on a Train to enjoy in perpetuity. But there's one final collaborator that I have to mention, and that is composer Dmitri Tiomkin. He's one of those composers where when you look up his career, you're like, oh my God, like was there any great movie from the 30s, 40s, and 50s where you didn't compose the score? And obviously he had a lot of peers and rivals in his profession, people like Max Steiner or Bernard Herrmann. I mean, there are a lot of luminaries doing similar great work at that time. But Dmitri Tiomkin, he's one of those composers where his body of work is so impressive and so massive and so comprehensive, you almost kind of run out of words trying to describe just how good he is. But suffice to say, his score for this movie was excellent. But I think at this point, I've said enough about my love for Hitchcock and his collaborators and their approach to storytelling. At this point, I just want to talk about my favorite scenes. And I mentioned this in my video about Billy Wilder's film Ace in the Hole, where when I'm looking for highlights from a Billy Wilder movie, I look for the great lines. But when I'm looking for highlights from an Alfred Hitchcock movie, I look for the great shots. He's one of those directors where it's like his movies are just a buffet of one gorgeous shot after another, like just one feat of dizzying technique after another. Where like you can't even believe what you're seeing. But luckily, due to this book, he tells you exactly how he achieved most of the great shots. Let's take the murder of Guy's wife. That sequence is just a masterclass in suspense because we know Bruno's going to kill her. The question is how. But the way that scene unfolds and the way she's constantly looking at him, and you can tell she likes men looking at her. She likes being flirted with. She likes being desired. She's with a couple of guys, and yet she's still got the big eye for yet another guy. Not Guy, her ex-husband, but Bruno, the guy that's following her and about to kill her. But there's so many great pump fakes when they're going through the tunnel and you hear her screaming, but it's just them, screwing around and singing all those songs as Bruno's kind of stalking her. But when he finally catches up with her, there's this great bit where she steps into the light. And for a brief shining moment, she tries to kind of flirt with him. And she's using an accent, which sounds like an affectation, because as they describe frequently throughout this movie, Guy is trying to rise through the ranks. He's a social climber. He's marrying into the upper class, and he's trying to get rid of his wife, who's from the lower class. But admittedly, she was constantly cheating on him and so on and so forth. Like he's got his reasons. But she does an accent which it almost sounds like she's trying to sound more sophisticated than she actually is. But then, of course, Bruno just comes in with the hands, and then we get that incredible shot through her glasses. And according to Hitchcock's interview with Truffaut, it's just a special lens that they use, but it completely distorts the action in a way where it just makes it hypnotic. I feel like if you're going to create like a new poster for the movie, instead of using this garbage, maybe they should have done like a really cool, beautiful, like hand-drawn illustration that's like an abstraction of that shot. But it's one of the most iconic shots in all of Hitchcock. It's just absolutely fucking incredible. But another aspect of this movie that I absolutely love is how quickly they get through vital exposition sequences, because while Guy's embroiled in this absolutely bizarre plot with this guy stalking him and trying to guilt trip him into murdering his father, when his bride-to-be finally gets wise to the situation, when he explains the plot to her, he does so in about like 10 seconds, and she's like, oh my God, it's just fantastic. But she immediately gets on board, and in the hands of a lesser storyteller, you'd have like some long, drawn-out sequence where she feels betrayed that he's been concealing secrets. It'd just be like some ridiculous melodramatic scene. But for Hitchcock, plausibility and logic weren't necessarily that interesting. Like, there's an emotional logic to his movies, but they're not necessarily plausible. But a plausible story doesn't necessarily make it very exciting. Sometimes you need something that's above and beyond and that's completely in the realm of the utterly ridiculous, and that's where Hitchcock really thrives. But like, I feel like for people who want realism in their movies, don't watch movies by Alfred Hitchcock. His stories don't unfold in a realistic way. His shots don't unfold in a realistic way. That's not what interested him at all. What he wanted to give you was a heightened sense of experience, like total aesthetic ecstasy, like total aesthetic euphoria, where you're just in love with the imagery, you're in love with the incredibly intense emotions, like where you feel like the emotions and all the perversions are going to like spill over off the screen into the outside world. That's what he's reaching for. It's just that pure cinematic ecstasy that very few filmmakers knew how to achieve, and he just did it over and over and over again. But as great as this movie might be overall, I think my favorite part of the movie by far is this astonishing cross-cutting sequence where we're seeing two stories unfold at the same time, where Hitchcock is manipulating time. And he loved to decompress time and compress time and elongate it and compress it. He loved playing with time and manipulating our emotions through our perception of time. And there's this bit where Bruno is trying to get back to where he murdered Guy's ex because he wants to plant his lighter there so that he can frame him for the murder. And at the same time, Guy is trying to wrap up a tennis match so that he can beat Bruno to the island and stop him and foil his plan and reveal him as the actual killer. But he has to get through the tennis match in a normal way first, then elude the cops that are tailing him, and then get out there while Bruno's got a head start. So we're basically watching these two stories happen at the same time, where Guy initially is kicking butt in tennis, but then starts to lose. And Bruno, who initially has this massive head start, like an idiot, drops the lighter through a fucking grate in the street down into the sewer. And this is when Hitchcock basically throws all logic and reality and plausibility out the window, where you just have to accept the emotion of the scene, even if it makes no sense whatsoever. Because the grates are so narrow, you can barely even put your fingers in there. And Bruno's reaching in, and he knocks the lighter over. And then just through basically like cinematic bullshittery, Hitchcock treats us to this sequence where just millimeter by millimeter, we see Bruno's hand going lower and lower and lower. But like basically, in reality, he would be ripping all the flesh off his bones and probably scraping his bones. So like, there's no way you could fit your arm down there. But we're just so caught up in the emotion of the scene, we just accept the idea that millimeter by bloody millimeter, he's slowly getting down there and grabs it and it's like, oh, like what a relief. And he continues. But this is just Hitchcock at his devilish best, playing with our expectations, playing with our perception of time, and manipulating our emotions. And then he finally gets to the amusement park, and he's like, what time does it get dark around here? And we realize, well, it's all just been like an emotional manipulation for nothing, because even if he got to the island hours before Guy, he would not be able to go out to the island until it actually got dark. And so it's like this ultimate, incredibly sophisticated, elaborate pump fake, and then we can kind of exhale one time. Then Guy and Bruno can finally meet headlong in the dramatic conclusion on the carousel. Well, once again, throw reality out the window. It's basically almost like one of those like astronaut like training exercises where they're seeing how much gravity you can withstand. Like no carousel in a million years would ever be able to spin with that ferocity and have people like hanging on for dear life. But it's obviously an astonishing scene. But the very last shot I want to call attention to has been poked fun at in other movies like Top Secret. But we have this simple setup where there's a phone in the foreground and the characters are in the background. But if you want to have the phone dominate the foreground that much, it'd be tough to keep both in focus at the same time, no matter how good you might be at universal focus. So obviously they're using a big, like oversized prop, and then when it leaves the frame, you switch to a person on a normal phone. But of course in Top Secret, he reaches down and grabs the big phone and just keeps talking on the big phone. It's one of those things where if you haven't been parodied or made fun of or ridiculed or kind of skewered by other filmmakers in their spoof movies, well, then you haven't really done that great a job. Obviously, like Mel Brooks made High Anxiety, which pokes fun out of a bunch of Hitchcock movies. But yeah, over the years, a lot of filmmakers, in very loving terms, have decided to kind of, poke Hitchcock with a stick. But I welcome it because oftentimes it's through those comedies and through those spoofs that we discover these movies that we end up falling in love with long after the fact. But I think at this point I've showered enough praise on this movie. It's time to switch over to my updated top 10 list for Alfred Hitchcock. And I did not watch my video from my top 10 Alfred Hitchcock from I think 4 years ago ahead of time. So I don't know if I've evolved like dramatically or if it's basically going to be the exact same list. But I thought it'd be more fun to just just search my emotions, search my feelings, and come up with my top 10. And the hardest part of this list is my number 10. I have a lot of really strong contenders for my number 10, but 9 through 1, they're more or less probably going to remain unchanged. I might change the order, but those 9 will never really be altered in the years to come. So my contenders for number 10, it's either going to be Lifeboat, The Wrong Man, or Rebecca. And Lifeboat's probably the most entertaining of them. The Wrong Man is probably the most disturbing. And Rebecca is probably the most sophisticated and glamorous. That was Hitchcock's introduction to the American market when David S. Selznick brought him over to America, put him to work making all of his early classics. But whichever one of those which you want to go with for my number 10, I'm happy with. I guess if I had to pick one, I would just say Lifeboat, just because I find the premise of Lifeboat to be so fascinating. But here we go, from 9 to 1. 39 Steps. Basically, Hitchcock remade that movie over and over and over again, but I think it's better as North by Northwest, but the 39 Steps is pretty goddamn good. The Lady Vanishes. I think that's my favorite Hitchcock movie that he made in Europe prior to coming to America. Then we get into some of his 40s essentials. Notorious with Cary Grant, Ingrid Bergman, and Claude Rains. That's one of my favorite post-World War II thrillers that was made by anybody, and I think it's Hitchcock's last really mean and nasty, serious thriller. Strangers on a Train is a light-hearted thriller, but Notorious, it packs a massive punch. And then arguably the most delightful movie that Hitchcock ever made, and I think it's his best presentation or best depiction of American life of any of his movies, Shadow of a Doubt, starring Joseph Cotten. I might have seen Shadow of a Doubt more than any other Hitchcock movie. I don't know why it's not necessarily ranked higher, because I just find it so goddamn enjoyable. Once again, but 10 minutes from now, I might rearrange these 9 in a completely different order. But now it's time for my top 5. Strangers on a Train in number 5. You know the drill on that. I just spent the last however many minutes singing its praises.
Who is he?
I hardly know him, sir.
Well, get him out of here as soon as you decently can, will you? This is a nice item for the gossips. First thing you know, they'll be talking about orgies.
Vertigo for my number 4. I know a lot of people regard Vertigo as the finest film ever made. I think a big part of the mystique and the mystery of Vertigo is that for so many years it was out of circulation, but when film freaks in the 70s were finally able to get their hands on it again and see it, because they'd been deprived of it for so long, I think at that time people were, tempted to maybe embellish its greatness. Or who knows, maybe I'm just being an ignorant asshole and not seeing the greatness for what it is. I think Vertigo is incredibly mysterious and incredibly beautiful, and probably Hitchcock's most perverted movie, but it's not necessarily his most entertaining movie, because his most entertaining movies are the next 3, North by Northwest, Psycho, and Rear Window. I think if I were to sit somebody down and show them their first Hitchcock movies, Rear Window would be a very strong contender to start with. Psycho, if they're more into horror movies, and North by Northwest, if they're more into James Bond thrillers and chases and that sort of thing. But I feel like between those 3 movies, you get great excitement, great horror, and great kind of glamour and mystery. All of Hitchcock's best qualities are exemplified by those 3 movies. But let me know, am I overlooking something from his filmography? There's certain movies like Marnie where I find them really, really interesting at times, but I don't think they're as good from start to finish. And there's some other gems kind of tucked away inside there as well. But these are the 9 that I find myself coming back to most frequently. But with that, I think I've said all I've got to say about Hitch for now, and I look forward to doing more videos about Hitchcock's career in the years to come. But if you enjoyed this video, please remember to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, leave a comment down below, hit that notification bell, become a member, all that good stuff. But thanks again for watching, and more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.